Welcome, dear listener, to the Sleeping Hourglass. Tonight, as the stars stretch across the night sky, we will journey together to the early 20th century Philippines, a land of islands poised between empires, a people searching for their voice, and a leader whose heart beat not only for his own nation, but for strangers across oceans. This is the story of Manuel L. Quezon, the father of the Philippine language, the president in exile, and a man who dared to open his arms when the world was closing its doors. It is a story woven of courage and compassion, of the quiet power of words, and the gentleness of mercy in a time when mercy was rare. And if you find comfort here, you might choose to linger with us, to subscribe or leave a kind note, not as an obligation, but as a way to keep this little space alive. Think of it as tending a lantern so its glow can reach the next traveler. The town of Baler in the late 19th century is a place where land and sea hold each other in tender balance. The Pacific waves roll endlessly against its shore, carrying whispers of distant worlds, while the mountains stand firm, enclosing the town like a protective embrace. Beneath the tamarind trees, a boy sits quietly, watching the shadows shift as the sun drifts across the sky. His name is Manuel Luis Quezon, though for now he is simply a child among the people of Tayabas, his voice still soft, his thoughts still unformed, his spirit listening more than it speaks. The tamarind tree is his companion. Its branches stretch wide, casting cool shade over the earth, a refuge in the tropical heat. Children climb it, laughter spilling like music. Elders sit beneath it, telling stories of saints, soldiers, and sorrows. To young Manuel, the tree feels eternal, its roots reaching deep into the soil of his hometown, its fruit both sour and sweet, much like the life that waits for him beyond childhood. In Baler, the rhythm of days is slow. The church bells toll, calling the faithful to prayer. The sea hums a constant hymn, its tide rising and falling like a mother's breath. Manuel grows attuned to these sounds, learning early that life is woven of both constancy and change. His family is modest, their livelihood bound to the same earth and sea that cradle the whole town. His father, Lucio Quezon, serves as a local schoolteacher and soldier, instilling in his son the importance of knowledge and duty. His mother, Maria Dolores Molina, offers the warmth of care and the devotion of faith, teaching him gentleness even in hardship. The Philippines of his childhood is a land caught in the shadow of empire. Spain still holds its rule, its flag fluttering over churches and garrisons. Yet whispers of resistance stir in every town, carried in secret conversations, in poems passed from hand to hand, in the longing for freedom that simmers beneath obedience. Manuel is too young to fully understand, but he senses it. The unease in his father's voice, the pride in the tales of local heroes, the tension that lingers in the air whenever authority is near. Baler itself bears scars of both faith and struggle. The church, built of stone and fortified by devotion, has seen battles and sieges. It stands as a symbol of resilience, of colonization, of endurance. In its pews, Manuel listens to Latin prayers that seem distant, almost foreign, though their cadence sinks deep into his memory. In the marketplace, he hears the familiar rhythm of Tagalog, the language of his people, alive with laughter, bargaining, and song. Between these two tongues, he begins to sense a divide, one of power, one of belonging. Beneath the tamarind tree, Manuel hears his elders tell stories of old revolts, of brave men who took up arms against colonial masters. These are not lessons in textbooks, but lessons whispered in twilight, when the air grows cooler and the stars begin to pierce the night. The boy listens, eyes wide, his young heart stirred by the idea that dignity can burn brighter than fear. The tamarind tree, rooted and immovable, becomes his witness, a silent keeper of the thoughts forming in his restless mind. Yet his childhood is not only shadowed by empire. There is joy in its simple rhythms. The splash of river water when children play, the crackle of firewood as families gather in the evenings, the sweetness of rice cakes prepared by loving hands. Manuel laughs, runs, and dreams like any boy. Still, he carries a seriousness beyond his years, a sharpness of mind that sets him apart. His father notices. His teachers notice. Words seem to find him easily, as though language itself leans close to his ear, whispering secrets about how to shape the world. The tamarind tree becomes a quiet schoolroom. When he recites lessons, he sometimes practices beneath its branches, murmuring phrases into the air. When he feels the sting of discipline, he retreats to its shade, nursing pride alongside bruised feelings. When he wonders about the wide sea and the unseen lands beyond, he gazes upward through its canopy, imagining horizons that stretch further than the eye can see. In those days, Baler is still a small place, untouched by the grandeur of Manila. Yet even in its remoteness, it is touched by the larger currents of history. In 1898, when Manuel is still a young man, the tides of empire shift violently. The Spanish-American War erupts, pulling the Philippines into its waves. News reaches Baler slowly, but when it arrives, it comes with the force of destiny. His childhood innocence cannot last. The world is changing, and he must change with it. But before revolution, before exile, before politics and speeches, there is only the boy beneath the tamarind tree, listening, learning, absorbing the first lessons of belonging and identity. The shade of childhood holds him, shaping his earliest sense of self. He learns that words carry weight, that silence can echo, that dignity is not given but guarded. These truths sink into him like roots into soil, unseen yet essential, waiting for the day when they will bear fruit. When storms roll across the Pacific, Manuel sometimes watches the waves batter the shore. He sees how the sea, though vast and mighty, never overcomes the land entirely. The shore bends, absorbs, and endures. He carries this image quietly in his mind. The resilience of his hometown, the strength of his people. He does not yet know how often he will need to call upon that resilience, but the image stays with him, a guiding symbol. As night falls in Baler, the stars stretch endlessly overhead. The tamarind tree's branches sway gently in the wind, leaves whispering lullabies older than memory. The boy beneath it dreams not of power or politics, but of belonging to his family, to his town, to the land that shapes him. Yet already history leans toward him, drawing him into its current. The child's world of prayer and play will one day expand into the world of law, debate, and leadership. But for now, the shade is enough, the sea is enough, the murmurs of elders are enough. Childhood cradles him for one last season. In later years, when Quezon is far from Baler, far from tamarind trees and familiar shores, he will remember. He will carry with him the scent of earth after rain, the sound of waves striking rocks, the feel of bark beneath his palm. He will remember that even the greatest ambitions must rest on the humble roots of home. For it was here, in this small town, that he first learned the weight of words, the rhythm of silence, and the fire of dignity. And so, The boy of Baler grows beneath the tamarind tree, gathering the quiet strength of his roots. Soon, he will leave this shade for the wider world, where new tongues and sharper debates await him, the first steps of a dream carried on Spanish voices. The boy from Baler leaves the shade of tamarind trees for the stone walls of Manila. The journey itself feels like a crossing of worlds, from the rhythms of sea and soil to the ordered pulse of the city, where cobblestones ring with the footsteps of friars, students, and clerks. Manila, at the turn of the century, is both a city of shadows and promises. It bears the mark of empire in its cathedrals, convents, and government halls, yet within its crowded streets lies the restless murmur of a people who yearn for something more. Manuel Luis Quezon arrives as a young man, carrying the humility of his provincial beginnings, yet within him stirs a restless ambition. Education is the ladder he seeks to climb, and Spanish, the language of power, of law, of government, is the rung by which he must ascend. In classrooms where Latin prayers once felt foreign, he now leans into Spanish not merely as a lesson, but as a weapon to be mastered. For in this language lies access to books, to courts, to the possibility of shaping his people's fate. The University of Santo Tomas becomes his world for a time. Here, amidst the cool stone corridors and the murmur of debates, Quezon studies law. The law books he pores over are written in Spanish, their sentences dense and precise. He learns the rhythm of their clauses, the weight of their arguments. Yet each page carries an irony he cannot ignore. The rules that govern his people are written in a language not their own. Still, he bends his mind to the task, aware that to fight for justice, he must first speak in the tongue of power. His sharp mind and sharper tongue soon draw attention. In debates, his words cut with clarity, weaving logic with persuasion. He is not the loudest, but his voice lingers, steady and deliberate. There is fire beneath his measured tone, the fire of a young man who knows that words can bend the course of thought, that a sentence well placed can be stronger than a sword. Outside the classroom, Manila itself becomes another teacher. He walks through its plazas, hearing Spanish in government offices, English beginning to trickle in with the American presence, and Tagalog flowing in the markets. Each language is a world of its own, shaping thought, shaping belonging. Manuel listens carefully, sensing both the bridges and barriers they create. The Spanish tongue elevates him, marks him as educated, but distances him from the heartbeats of ordinary Filipinos. It is a paradox he carries, uplifted by a borrowed voice, yet longing for one that is truly his. His law career begins with modest steps, but even in these early cases, his brilliance emerges. He defends clients with eloquence, arguing not just from statutes but from dignity. His speeches in court reveal more than skill, they reveal a man who believes deeply in fairness, even when justice bends under the weight of power. Those who hear him sense that this young lawyer carries something rare, not merely knowledge but conviction. Politics soon beckons. The Philippines, after the Spanish-American War, enters a new chapter under American occupation. The air is thick with uncertainty. Will independence come? Or will this be yet another empire's possession? Quezon, shaped by Spanish learning, steps cautiously into this shifting landscape. His Spanish tongue allows him to speak with authority in courts and assemblies, yet already he begins to sense that a nation cannot live forever in borrowed words. The longing for a Filipino voice begins as a quiet murmur in his soul. There are nights when Quezon, weary from study or debate, recalls the sound of Tagalog in Baler, the way his mother's prayers felt warmer in their native rhythm, the way elders told stories beneath the tamarind tree. Compared to the crisp formality of Spanish, these words feel alive, rooted, close to the people. He does not yet have the power to elevate them, but the thought begins to grow within him. A nation without its own tongue is a body without breath. Still, he sharpens his Spanish like a blade. It wins him recognition, allies, and influence. In assemblies, his speeches rise with eloquence, earning him the title, Gentleman from Tayabas. Those around him note his charisma, his ability to persuade not just with logic but with a certain warmth that disarms even his rivals. Spanish has given him the stage, but it is his spirit, earnest, fiery, resilient, that holds the audience. Manila, with its mixture of grandeur and poverty, shapes his vision further. He sees the gap between the educated few and the masses who labor in silence. He understands that true leadership must bridge this divide, must give voice to the voiceless. Spanish grants him entry into halls of power, but he cannot forget the fishermen of Baler, the farmers of Tayabas, the countless Filipinos whose lives are never touched by the language of the elite. In quiet moments, Quezon reflects on the irony, his dreams, his ambitions, his rise, all carried on Spanish tongues. Yet within him grows the conviction that someday the nation must speak in its own voice. It is a thought not yet fully formed, but already it flickers like a candle in the dark, steady and insistent. As his career ascends, Manuel begins to see his own life as part of a larger story, one where education, language, and law are not ends in themselves, but tools for something greater. He has stepped from the shade of the tamarind tree into the glare of Manila's sun, and in that light, he begins to glimpse his destiny. The Spanish words that once felt like ladders now feel like scaffolds. Useful, necessary, but not permanent. Someday, he will return to the language of his childhood, not as a boy, but as a leader who understands that nations, like people, must breathe in their own voice. For now, he climbs higher, debate by debate, speech by speech, his dreams carried on Spanish tongues. And so, the young Quezon, sharpened by study and lifted by language, takes his first steps into the uncertain theatre of politics. But as empires shift and battles rise, his words will no longer belong only to books and debates. They will be tested in the shadow of revolution. The dawn of the 20th century comes to the Philippines not with peace, but with fire. The air carries the smoke of revolution, and the earth trembles with the march of armies. For centuries, Spain has ruled with its flag, its friars, and its laws. But now, its grip loosens under the pressure of a people who rise demanding dignity, demanding freedom. In Baler, in Manila, in countless towns across the archipelago, whispers of rebellion swell into cries, and cries into battles. Manuel Luis Quezon, no longer just a boy from Tayabas, now stands as a young man drawn into the tide of history. The tamarind trees of his childhood still root him, but their shade is far away. In its place, he finds himself beneath the shadows of revolution, where the world itself seems uncertain, shifting with every battle fought, every treaty signed. When the revolution flares in 1896, Quezon feels its echo in his blood. He is not among its earliest leaders, not like Bonifacio with his fervent Katipunan, nor Aguinaldo with his armies, but the cause stirs him nonetheless. Like so many of his generation, he carries the tension of two lives, the disciplined life of study, and the restless life of struggle. He has been trained in law, yet the law is not always just. He has mastered Spanish words, yet those words too often serve only the rulers, not the ruled. And so, when called, he puts aside his books and takes up the duty of a soldier. As a young officer in Aguinaldo's army, Quezon learns the weight of a rifle, the exhaustion of marches, the fear and adrenaline of combat. His hands, once stained with ink, are now smudged with powder and soil. He fights in defense of a dream not yet realized. A Philippines free, a Philippines whole. In the humid nights of camp, as the crickets sing and the stars hang heavily overhead, he listens to the older men tell stories of battles lost and won. The revolution is not only written in history books, it is carved into their very bodies, scarred by wounds carried in grief for comrades fallen. Yet revolution is never simple. Even as the Filipinos push back against Spanish rule, another power arrives across the seas. The Spanish-American War of 1898 erupts, and the Philippines becomes one of its battlegrounds. The great empires wrestle above the islands like titans, and ordinary men and women are caught beneath their clash. Spain, weakened, cedes the Philippines not to its own people, but to the United States, trading land, and leaves in the Treaty of Paris. For many Filipinos, it is a betrayal, freedom snatched away just as it seemed within reach. Quezon, watching these events unfold, feels the dissonance deep within him. The revolution has raised hopes, but the American flag now waves where the Spanish once flew. Some believe the Americans bring promise, schools, roads, perhaps a gentler hand than Spain's. Others see only another conqueror. The young lawyer-soldier sees both: the opportunity in learning from the new rulers, and the danger in being silenced by them. The Philippine-American War begins, and the land bleeds once more. Towns burn, villages are uprooted, lives are lost by the thousands. In Tayabas, as in so many provinces, families hide in the hills to escape the violence. Manuel himself, though once in Aguinaldo's forces, finds a path that blends service with survival. He eventually lays down arms and returns to law, practicing under the new regime. For some, it may appear a compromise, but for Quezon, it is strategy. He understands that the struggle for independence will not be won only on battlefields. It will also be waged in courts, in assemblies, in words sharpened by reason and compassion. His training as a lawyer serves him well in these shifting times. He defends Filipinos in American-led courts, arguing for fairness within a system not designed for them. His voice, honed in Spanish, begins to adapt to the new reality, where English now enters the stage of power. He listens, he learns, he navigates, but always, beneath it all, his loyalty remains to his people. The revolution leaves scars, not only on bodies but on hearts. For Quezon, the shadow of war deepens his sense of purpose. He has seen how ordinary men suffer while empires trade treaties. He has walked among soldiers who fought bravely but returned to empty homes. He has tasted the bitterness of freedom deferred. These experiences temper him like steel in fire, making him both cautious and determined. In evenings, when the day's work is done, Quezon sometimes reflects on the contradictions of his time. He has fought with a rifle for independence, and now he wields words to preserve dignity within occupation. He sees his people caught between languages, between rulers, between futures. Yet he also senses that this fragile soil, watered with blood, shaken by wars, is the very ground where a new nation will one day rise. He begins to step more firmly into politics, realizing that leadership is not only about speeches nor about battles, but about guiding a people through uncertainty. His charisma, his sharpness, his ability to charm and persuade, these grow in importance. Allies notice his potential, rivals recognize his ambition. Slowly, the young soldier becomes more than a witness to history. He becomes one of its authors. But in these early years, his voice is still forming, his role still uncertain. He is shaped by contradictions, lawyer and soldier, Spanish educated, but Tagalog at heart, a man loyal to both justice and survival. Yet in these contradictions lies his strength. He understands the fragility of sovereignty, the cost of freedom, the necessity of both patience and passion. As the revolution fades into memory and American occupation takes firmer root, Quezon stands at the threshold of a new chapter. He is no longer only the boy beneath the tamarind tree, no longer only the student of Manila. He is a man shaped by the fire of revolution and the shadow of empire. The soil may be fragile, but from it, a new political voice grows. One that will soon rise in the halls of assembly, speaking not only for himself but for an entire nation searching for its path. And so, Quezon emerges from the revolution, tempered by both battle and law, carrying the wounds of a nation not yet free. Ahead of him waits the assembly, where his voice, eloquent, sharp, and unyielding, will earn him a name, the gentleman from Tayabas. The revolution lies behind him, but its echoes remain in every corner of the land. The Philippines is no longer Spain's colony, and yet it is not free. The American flag now flutters above Manila, its stars and stripes promising order, progress, and tutelage, a promise many greet with hope and many with suspicion. In this fragile balance, the Philippine Assembly is born, a chamber where voices may rise, though sovereignty is still kept at arm's length. Into this chamber steps Manuel Luis Quezon, a man forged by law, by battle, and by restless ambition. He is young, polished, and hungry. From the provincial soil of Tayabas, he carries with him both humility and fire. His past as soldier and lawyer clings to him like shadows, but here, in the halls of government, he finds a new stage. One where words can wound sharper than rifles, one where speeches might tilt the course of a nation. The assembly itself is a place of contrasts. Its carved wood, its echoes of Spanish architecture, its air heavy with the scent of ink and parchment, all remind the men gathered there that they stand in a space designed for governance, yet still under watchful American eyes. The Governor-General holds veto power. The American presence lingers in corridors, polite but firm, reminding all that true authority lies elsewhere. And yet, within these walls, something flickers, a fragile experiment in self-rule, a rehearsal for independence yet to come. Quezon enters as a delegate from Tayabas. At first, he is one voice among many, one face among a rising generation of Filipino leaders, Osmeña, Rojas, and others whose names will one day anchor history. But quickly, his presence grows difficult to ignore. There is a quality to him, an energy that gathers when he begins to speak. He stands with calm poise, his words deliberate, his cadence steady. Spanish remains the favored tongue of the assembly, and Quezon wields it with mastery, each phrase polished, each argument sharp. But beyond rhetoric, he possesses something rarer, the ability to stir both heart and reason. He can argue law like a lawyer, but he can also soften his tone, appealing to compassion, to the memory of shared suffering, to the dream of a free and dignified Philippines. Colleagues begin to take note. They call him the gentleman from Tayabas, a title that carries both admiration and respect. In debate, he does not shout nor bluster. Instead, he speaks with a measured strength that demands attention. Adversaries bristle, allies lean closer. He is charming without frivolity, persuasive without arrogance. In him, they see the possibility of a leader who can stand before colonizers without bowing, and before his own people without losing their trust. Politics, however, is never pure. The assembly is rife with rivalries, with personalities that clash like steel. Quezon proves himself not only eloquent, but shrewd. He navigates factions, cultivates allies, tempers enemies. Behind the grace of his speeches lies a calculating mind, aware that power, to be effective, must be built brick by brick, relationship by relationship. The gentleman's charm becomes as vital a tool as his lawyer's wit. Beyond the walls of the assembly, the country wrestles with contradictions. American schools are rising, teaching English to a new generation. Roads and bridges expand, connecting provinces once isolated. Yet poverty endures, and the memory of war's brutality lingers. Many Filipinos question whether independence will ever truly come, or whether promises are but smoke. In this tension, Quezon's words carry weight. He becomes not only a delegate, but a voice for dignity, pressing for greater autonomy, urging his people to believe that freedom, though delayed, is not denied. There are moments in the assembly when silence follows his speeches, a silence deeper than applause, where even rivals sense the sincerity of his conviction. He does not simply argue for laws. He argues for the soul of a people learning to believe in themselves again. He knows well that the struggle is unfinished, that sovereignty remains incomplete, but he also knows that every word spoken with courage lays a stone on the road to independence. In evenings, Quezon retreats from the assembly's chamber, but the work does not end. He meets with fellow delegates, debates in parlors, writes letters, refines strategies. His ambition is fierce, but not only for himself. He envisions a Philippines that can stand tall among nations, no longer an echo of empires, but a voice in its own right. His charisma draws people to him, his confidence reassures them, his eloquence inspires them. Slowly, he rises beyond Tayabas, becoming a figure known throughout the archipelago. Yet he remains mindful of appearances. He dresses with care, carries himself with dignity, knowing that leadership is as much about presence as it is about policy. The title, Gentleman from Tayabas, is not merely a courtesy, it is a reflection of how he wishes to be seen, principled, refined, a leader who embodies both strength and civility. The assembly years are formative. They sharpen his skills, temper his ambition, and test his resolve. He learns that compromise is sometimes necessary, that patience can be as strategic as passion. He learns that charm can open doors that force cannot. Most of all, he learns that the trust of the people is both fragile and sacred, a trust earned slowly and lost quickly. As time passes, Quezon's reputation grows. He is no longer just a delegate. He is a rising star in the constellation of Filipino politics. His voice, once trained in Spanish debates of Manila, now echoes across the islands. He carries with him the memory of Baler, the fire of revolution, the discipline of law, and the charm of a gentleman. All these threads weave together, forming the fabric of a leader still in the making. For Quezon, the assembly is more than a chamber of laws. It is a stage where he learns how to embody the hopes of his people. Here, he tests the balance between ambition and compassion, between eloquence and humility, between the sharpness of law and the softness of persuasion. Each speech, each debate, each handshake becomes part of a larger story, a story not yet complete, but already resonant. The revolution had given him the shadow of fire. The assembly now gives him the light of leadership. He is still young, still restless, but the nation begins to look to him with expectation. In the quiet of night, perhaps he wonders if he is ready, if he can bear the weight. Yet even in doubt, his resolve remains to stand, to speak, to lead. And so, Quezon earns his place in the assembly, his voice shaping laws and lifting hopes, his presence remembered as the gentleman from Tayabas. Soon, his path will carry him far beyond Manila, across the ocean to Washington, where he must learn to walk beside giants. Washington, D.C., at the dawn of the 20th century, hums with a quiet authority. Its avenues stretch wide, lined with sycamores and guarded by statues cast in bronze. White marble rises in domes and columns, echoing the grandeur of Greece and Rome, as if the young republic wishes to root itself in the myths of older civilizations. Into this world, vast, foreign, and often cold, walks Manuel L. Quezon, the representative of a people not yet free. He comes not as an equal, but as a resident commissioner, a curious role crafted by empire, a voice permitted to speak in Congress but denied the right to vote. It is a position both honored and hollow, a reminder that his homeland, the Philippines, still bends beneath America's will. Yet Quezon, who once marched with revolutionaries, does not shrink from the irony. He wears it like armor, for he knows that words, if wielded with precision, can cut more deeply than any blade. The streets of Washington feel distant from Baler's shores, but Quezon carries his province with him. In the cadence of his speech, in the dark fire of his eyes, in the restless energy that will not let him be silent, the Philippines walks beside him. Every time he rises to speak, every time he extends his hand in greeting, it is not only Manuel who is present. It is a nation in waiting, pressing forward through his voice. Quezon quickly learns that politics in the capital is less a battlefield than a theatre. Senators and congressmen speak in measured tones, trading words like chess pieces, each move rehearsed for effect. He studies them the way a soldier studies terrain, noting when a gesture softens a hard truth, when a pause carries more weight than a paragraph. Slowly he adapts. The boy who once recited prayers beneath tamarind trees now learns to recite arguments before marble pillars. He understands, too, that charm is as powerful as conviction. With his quick wit and warm smile, Quezon disarms men who at first saw him only as a colonial representative, a footnote in America's grand narrative. He dines with congressmen, trades stories with journalists, and learns the subtle rhythm of American humor. In these small exchanges, trust begins to form, and with trust comes the possibility of persuasion. Perhaps most importantly, Quezon befriends presidents. With William Howard Taft, once the Governor-General of the Philippines, he finds a man who knows his homeland's soil and struggles. Taft listens, though always through the lens of empire. With Woodrow Wilson, the scholar president, Quezon shares long conversations about democracy and freedom. Wilson speaks of self-determination, yet in practice moves cautiously, reluctant to release the Philippines too soon. Quezon listens, debates, and pushes gently at the edges of promise, planting seeds that will bloom only years later. These encounters are not mere ceremonies for him. They are lessons. He watches how presidents command a room, how they balance firmness with warmth, how they carry themselves as symbols larger than their own flesh. Quezon is not simply awed by their stature, he is studying as if preparing for a role he knows he will one day play. Walking beside these giants, he imagines how power might look in Filipino hands. The halls of Congress are filled with polished marble, but Quezon knows the cracks in the stone. He feels the weight of being an outsider, the whispered dismissals, the occasional condescension, the way some see him not as a statesman, but as an ornament of empire. Yet each slight only strengthens his resolve. If America prides itself on democracy, then he will hold them to their own creed. If they speak of liberty, he will ask why it halts at the Pacific. He does not fight with anger, but with persistence. Speech by speech, he reminds them that Filipinos have fought, bled, and governed themselves long before foreign flags were raised on their shores. He reminds them that the revolution against Spain was not a whim, but the flowering of a national soul. He speaks as both advocate and witness, a man whose very presence testifies to his people's readiness for freedom. In the evenings, when the debates grow quiet, Quezon reflects on the strange path that brought him here. He recalls the dusty roads of Tayabas, the salty winds of Baler, the days when independence seemed like a dream barely spoken. Now he is in the very heart of an empire, pressing that dream forward inch by inch. The journey feels improbable, yet destiny often walks in improbable shoes. Still, there are limits. No matter how eloquently he speaks, Quezon cannot cast a single vote in Congress. He can influence but not decide, persuade but not command. The frustration gnaws at him, but he learns to transform it into discipline. If he cannot legislate, he will cultivate allies. If he cannot pass laws, he will shape minds. His power lies not in the letter of authority, but in the spirit of persistence. And in this, Quezon excels. American newspapers begin to note his presence. Journalists describe him as eloquent, fiery, magnetic. To some, he is a curiosity, the colonial who speaks with the polish of a statesman. To others, he is a herald of something larger, the stirring of a nation that will not remain silent. For Quezon, every column written, every conversation recalled, is another thread in the tapestry of independence. He understands that nations are not freed in a single declaration. They are freed in the slow weaving of persuasion, diplomacy, and sacrifice. His role in Washington is to keep the thread from breaking, to ensure that the Philippines is not forgotten amid the noise of American politics. Yet amid the politics, Quezon never loses sight of the personal. He writes to his family in Manila, his words carrying both longing and resolve. He confides to friends that the distance from home weighs heavily, yet he endures it for the sake of his people. In his solitude, the thought of a free Philippines becomes both comfort and fuel. When he walks the streets of Washington at night, passing under the glow of gas lamps and the shadow of the Capitol dome, he sometimes imagines a different city. Manila, rebuilt and shining, where Filipinos speak in one tongue and govern themselves without interference. The image is fragile but luminous, a lantern he carries within him against the darkness of exile. By the time Quezon's years as resident commissioner draw to a close, he is no longer merely a provincial lawyer who stumbled into politics. He has become a seasoned statesman, sharpened by debate, tempered by diplomacy. He has learned how power moves, not only in speeches and laws, but in gestures, friendships, and patience. The boy from Baler has indeed walked beside giants, and in doing so has prepared himself to become one. As Quezon leaves Washington, he carries with him more than lessons of power. He carries a vision of a people bound together by words, not chains. And soon, in the next chapter of his journey, he will begin to give his nation that most enduring gift, a language of its own. In the heart of the Philippine archipelago, voices drift across mountains and seas. Some speak in the lilting cadence of Ilocano, others in the clipped rhythms of Kapampangan. Along the southern shores, Cebuano flows like rushing water, while in the plains, Tagalog sings with familiar warmth. Over 7,000 islands, more than 100 tongues rise and fall. A chorus of diversity, rich and layered, yet fractured when asked to speak as one. This is the Philippines at the dawn of the Commonwealth, and this is the challenge Manuel L. Quezon carries like a quiet weight upon his shoulders. Political independence may be promised, but true unity, he believes, requires something deeper. A common language that allows a farmer in Bicol and a teacher in Ilocos to recognize each other not as strangers, but as kin. Quezon has long known the power of words. As a boy, Spanish lifted him from Baler to Manila. As a lawyer, it sharpened his tongue in debate. As resident commissioner in Washington, English opened doors of persuasion. But each language, for all its utility, has also reminded him of distance. Spanish, the tongue of colonizers; English, the voice of empire. He longs for words that feel like home, words that spring from the soil, carrying the breath of rivers, forests, and fields that belong to the Filipino people alone. The question is not simple. Which tongue among many shall carry the burden of representing all? To elevate one risks offending others. To choose none is to remain voiceless. Quezon moves carefully, like a man crossing a fragile bridge over restless waters. He knows that his decision will echo through generations. He begins by listening. Linguists, scholars, and teachers gather in Manila, their tables stacked with manuscripts and dictionaries, each advocating for the richness of their own region. The air hums with debate, for every language carries pride, heritage, and identity. Yet Quezon, calm and deliberate, reminds them of the larger dream. A nation cannot live divided in tongue. We must find the words that unite us. Out of this debate rises Tagalog. Geographically central, structurally rich, and spoken in the heart of Luzon, where the capital stands, it becomes the chosen base for the national language. The decision is not without protest. In Cebu, in Iloilo, in Zamboanga, voices rise in resistance. Why Tagalog, and not Hiligaynon or Cebuano, whose speakers number more? Why privilege one tongue above others? Quezon does not dismiss their grief. He knows the sting of exclusion, the ache of pride wounded, but he believes unity requires sacrifice, and that from one seed all others may find a home. His dream is not to silence dialects, but to weave them into a larger song. Tagalog, as the trunk, will gather branches from every shore. He presses forward with resolve. In 1937, as President of the Commonwealth, he proclaims Tagalog as the basis of the national language. It is a moment both monumental and tender, a decision born not only of politics but of poetry. For in choosing a tongue rooted in the archipelago, Quezon chooses to plant identity in native soil. The proclamation ripples outward. In classrooms, children begin to learn not only English but Filipino, as the language will later be called. In newspapers, essays and poems emerge, tentative yet glowing, as writers stretch their voices in a shared tongue. The streets of Manila hum with new words, some old, some reshape, all carrying the pulse of belonging. To Quezon, this is more than policy. It is an act of faith. He imagines generations yet unborn speaking to one another without barriers, their hearts beating in the same rhythm of words. He imagines Filipinos abroad, scattered by circumstance, finding one another by a familiar phrase. Language, he believes, is the invisible thread of nationhood, unseen but unbreakable, and yet he knows the journey will not be smooth. For years, English remains the language of law and government, while Spanish lingers in the circles of the old elite. Regional dialects remain beloved in their provinces, stubborn and proud. Some scholars even question whether a national language can ever truly take root in such varied soil. But Quezon, with his stubborn faith, holds firm. Nations, like children, grow slowly. What begins as awkward syllables may one day become fluent song. He often speaks of language not in cold terms of governance, but in metaphors that stir the heart. He calls it the soul of a people, the vessel of memory. Without it, he says, freedom is incomplete. For what is liberty if one must borrow another's tongue to express it? His speeches carry the quiet conviction that independence is not only political but cultural, not only written in treaties but spoken in daily life. Beyond the halls of power, his vision begins to glow in small, ordinary moments. A teacher in a rural school sets aside English textbooks to recite poetry in Filipino. A mother in Cebu reads her child a story newly translated into the national tongue. A radio program carries the first broadcasts in a language that bridges Luzon to Mindanao. These are not yet revolutions, but they are beginnings, fragile as the first shoots of a tree. For Quezon, it is enough to begin. He knows his time may be short. Illness gnaws quietly at him, and war shadows the Pacific horizon. But if he cannot live to see a fully united people, he can at least give them the means to speak as one. Language, once planted, will outlive him. In quiet moments, he recalls his youth in Baler, when Spanish prayers filled the church and Tagalog lullabies drifted through the night. He thinks of his father, who spoke little, but whose silences carried dignity. He thinks of his mother, whose words shaped his earliest sense of love and belonging. Out of those humble beginnings, he now dreams of giving his entire people a voice. It is a legacy unlike any other. Presidents may build roads or pass laws, but roads crumble and laws fade. Language endures. It seeps into lullabies, market stalls, love letters, and prayers whispered in the dark. It becomes invisible yet essential, like breath. This, Quezon knows, is the true architecture of nationhood. By the late 1930s, his project is still fragile, contested, incomplete. Yet something irreversible has begun. For the first time, Filipinos scattered across islands can imagine themselves not merely as Ilocanos, Bisayans, or Tagalogs, but as one people, bound by words that belong to no empire, only to themselves. History will later refine, expand, and reshape this language. Scholars will argue, teachers will adapt, generations will bend it to new rhythms. But in this moment, under Quezon's hand, the seed is planted. It is an act both political and deeply human. The simple, radical belief that unity can begin with a shared word. As he reflects on this achievement, Quezon does not boast. He only smiles faintly, as if hearing in the distance the murmur of future voices. Millions of Filipinos speaking to each other, not across divisions, but across kinship. To him, it is like hearing the first notes of a long-awaited song. And so, with the planting of words, Quezon gives his people more than a policy. He gives them a soul that speaks. Yet even as this new language takes root, shadows of war creep nearer, threatening to silence the fragile harmony. Soon, the palace itself will stand as both promise and burden. The Pasig River flows steady and slow, its waters carrying both silt and memory. Along its banks rises Malacanang Palace, a structure of arches and columns, its white walls reflecting the tropical sun. For decades it had been the seat of colonial rulers, Spanish governors and American generals alike, but in 1935, for the first time in its long life, Malacanang opens its gates to a Filipino president. Manuel L. Quezon steps inside. It is not the first time he has seen the palace. He has visited before in the company of governors, diplomats, and dignitaries. But today feels different. Today he enters not as a supplicant nor as a guest, but as the head of a government chosen by his own people. The palace, once a symbol of foreign command, now bends, at least for a season, to the rhythm of a Filipino heart. Yet the grandeur carries weight. Chandeliers glitter above him, but Quezon feels the heaviness of their light. The halls echo not only with footsteps, but with history's expectation. Independence has been promised. 10 years of Commonwealth, and then freedom. 10 years is both a heartbeat and an eternity, and Quezon knows that the years ahead will be filled with trials that no palace wall can shield. Still, he allows himself a moment of wonder. In the reception halls, portraits of Spanish kings and American presidents linger, but Quezon envisions future canvases, portraits of Filipinos, faces weathered by the same sun that warms rice fields and fishing boats. He dreams that this palace will one day speak not of empire, but of nationhood. From his first days in office, Quezon seeks not merely to inhabit the palace, but to transform it. He wants it to be a place of Filipino dignity, not just a borrowed throne. Gardens are tended, halls are opened, and visitors are welcomed with warmth. He moves through its chambers with both charm and resolve, aware that every gesture, every decision, is a lesson to his people about what leadership means. He does not hide from grandeur, but neither does he drown in it. The palace is a stage, and Quezon uses it to project confidence, to show that Filipinos can govern themselves with grace and strength. Yet behind closed doors, he worries. How can one weave unity among a people still divided by region and class? How can one defend sovereignty when the Pacific trembles with the footsteps of war? Each morning, Quezon rises to the weight of these questions. His health, fragile from tuberculosis, does not always keep pace with his vision, but he pushes forward with restless energy, as though he senses that time itself is watching. The Commonwealth government begins to take shape. Laws are passed, institutions are strengthened, and a constitution, Filipino in spirit, yet born in the shadow of American oversight, frames their future. Quezon insists on civil service reform, determined that government positions be filled by merit rather than patronage. He dreams of a disciplined bureaucracy, lean and incorruptible, though he knows too well the temptations of power in a young nation. Beyond governance, he turns his eye to the land itself. Agrarian reform becomes one of his most urgent causes. He knows the countryside is restless, that peasants toil under the weight of tenancy while landlords prosper. He dreams of land for the tiller, though the problem proves thorny, knotted with centuries of inequality. Progress is slow, but his intent is clear. The palace must not be a fortress cut off from the people, but a listening house for their cries. In the evenings, Quezon walks the palace grounds. The gardens are calm, filled with frangipani and acacia trees, but beyond the gates lies a world less serene. Reports of unrest in Europe reach his desk. Hitler's speeches, Mussolini's campaigns, the ominous march of authoritarianism. Across the Pacific, Japan grows bold, its armies already pressing into China. The palace feels at times like a ship sailing into gathering storm clouds. He knows the Philippines is not ready for war. The Commonwealth Army is young, its weapons outdated, its soldiers brave but untested. General Douglas MacArthur, appointed as military advisor, becomes Quezon's ally in building defense, yet Quezon remains wary. He trusts the general's brilliance, but never forgets that the Philippines stands between empires, its fate tied to powers far beyond its own shores. Still, he refuses despair. I would rather have a government run like hell by Filipinos than one run like heaven by Americans. He once declared, a statement both proud and defiant. To him, self-rule, with all its risks, is better than gilded subjugation. Malacanang, for all its beauty, is not meant to be a cage but a bridge to independence. Inside its walls, life carries both ceremony and intimacy. Balls are held beneath chandeliers, foreign envoys bow politely, and music drifts from polished pianos. But in quieter corners, Quezon speaks tenderly with his wife, Aurora, whose steady presence anchors him. Their children wander the corridors, turning the palace into a home as much as a symbol. For Quezon, these moments matter as much as any speech. A palace that holds laughter and love is a palace that belongs not only to rulers but to people. Yet shadows creep closer. Intelligence reports speak of Japanese spies in Manila, of warships prowling the Pacific. Each time Quezon looks out across the Pasig, he wonders how long this fragile commonwealth can endure. 10 years to independence may be a dream too generous, a deadline swallowed by war's advance. Still, he holds on to hope. He dreams of a Philippines strong enough to stand alone, a people bound not only by government, but by shared language and pride. He dreams that the palace, once the seat of colonial power, will be remembered as the birthplace of independence. But dreams do not quiet the unease. At night, when the palace grows still, Quezon lies awake, listening to the river. Its waters murmur of both continuity and change, flowing past the palace as they always have, indifferent to kings or presidents. The river reminds him that leadership, like life, is fleeting. What matters is not the palace itself, but what seeds are planted during its season of promise. He knows his time may be short. Not only because of war, but because of illness. Tuberculosis eats away at him silently, its shadow deepening with each passing year. He coughs more often, tires more easily, yet he refuses to yield. My people need me, he whispers, as if repeating a prayer. The palace, with its grandeur, does not shield him from mortality. If anything, its walls only echo his fragility more loudly. And yet, even fragile, he presses on, for in every decision, he feels the weight of history pressing behind him and the gaze of the future ahead. The palace is both throne and burden, promise and warning. To enter it is to accept not only honor but sacrifice. By the late 1930s, Quezon stands firm as the figure of a nation in transition, eloquent, flawed, visionary, and mortal. In him, Filipinos see both pride and vulnerability, a leader who dares to dream even when storms loom. The palace around him glitters, but it is not the chandeliers that shine brightest. It is the quiet flame of determination within him, fragile yet unyielding, that illuminates the halls. In Malacanang, Quezon plants the dream of independence, even as the world beyond trembles with unrest. Soon, the palace that promised hope will become a harbour for strangers, refugees seeking shelter in Manila's quiet embrace. The late 1930s are a restless tide. Across Europe, whispers grow into shouts, and shouts harden into the marching boots of persecution. Dark banners unfurl over cities that once held music, markets, and laughter. In Vienna, Prague, and Berlin, families are forced from their homes, their books burned, their names scrawled onto lists meant to erase them. A continent trembles, but when desperate eyes turn outward for escape, most borders remain sealed. Nations debate numbers, quotas, and restrictions, as if lives could be measured like coins stacked on a ledger. Yet on the far edge of the Pacific, in a cluster of islands still under America's shadow, a man listens differently. Manuel L. Quezon, president of the Philippine Commonwealth, gazes from the windows of Malacañang Palace and feels the weight of the moment. The palace itself stands like a metaphor, white stone and arches, Spanish in its bones, American in its governance, but Filipino in the spirit of the man who now calls it home. He knows that independence for his people remains only half promised, its horizon tethered to the decisions of another power. And still, within these constraints, he wonders, can the Philippines, small as it is, offer something the great nations refuse? The question is not simple. His health is already fragile, his lungs scarred by tuberculosis. His cabinet grapples with issues of land, language, and labor. Japanese power grows restless in the Pacific, drawing closer by the year. And yet, amid all this, Quezon's heart turns toward strangers he has never met, toward men, women, and children whose only crime is being born to a faith that tyrants now despise. He is not alone in this thought. In Manila, the American High Commissioner Paul McNutt, with his imposing frame and gentle manner, becomes a quiet ally. So too does U.S. Army Colonel Dwight Eisenhower, a man still years away from the fame that history will later grant him. And in smoky halls of New York, the Jewish Refugee Committee pleads with the U.S. State Department for safe passage to anywhere, to any land where the rising tide of hatred cannot follow. But again and again, the answer from the world is no. The Philippines, though still under U.S. sovereignty, holds a unique position. Its Commonwealth government enjoys a measure of autonomy, its president possessing both ceremonial dignity and practical authority. Quezon seizes this fragile autonomy like a window before it shuts. He proposes a plan to bring in Jewish refugees, not by dozens but by thousands, to offer visas and land, and even, in his more ambitious dreams, to carve out a permanent settlement where they might flourish. The idea is radical, daring, and fraught with obstacles. The U.S. State Department fears setting a precedent. Some within Quezon's own circle worry about stirring resentment or stretching limited resources. Yet Quezon speaks not only as a statesman but as a man of conscience. The people of the Philippines, he declares, will have in their hands the means of showing to the world that when we are finally independent, we know how to discharge the obligations of freedom. And so begins the quiet harbour. Ships arrive in Manila Bay, their decks crowded with faces etched by fear and relief. They step onto Philippine soil with trembling steps, the air warm and fragrant with the scent of mango trees and salt. For some, it is the first breath of freedom after years of persecution. For others, it is the uncertain beginning of exile, but exile softened by welcome. Quezon, ever the dramatist at heart, does not merely approve these arrivals from a distance. He visits the community, shakes hands, listens. He offers words of reassurance in his booming, theatrical voice. To friends and aides, he reveals deeper layers of intent. He envisions granting land in Mindanao, the southern island, where refugees could farm and build anew. In the stillness of night, with his health faltering, he sketches outlines of a settlement that could have been both sanctuary and renewal, though the full dream will not come to pass, blocked by bureaucracy, war, and time. Its fragment lives, the lives saved, the families preserved, the children born who would carry forward memory and gratitude. For Quezon, this act is not charity but kinship. He recalls how his own people have long been treated as wards, denied full dignity by colonial rule. To offer shelter now is to proclaim that dignity is not given by empires but chosen by nations, even young and fragile ones. One can imagine him on the palace veranda, a cigar glowing faintly in the dusk, speaking to McNutt or Eisenhower, his voice low but urgent. We cannot wait for perfect conditions. If the world closes its doors, let us open ours. The Pasig River moves darkly beneath, and the lamps of the city shimmer on its surface like wavering stars. And so Manila becomes, if only for a moment, a harbour of compassion in a world tightening with cruelty. Between 1937 and 1941, roughly 1,200 Jewish refugees find safety in the Philippines. It is not the full number Quezon had dreamed, not the 10,000 or 30,000 he once imagined, but each life saved carries the immeasurable weight of worlds. In later years, survivors and descendants will remember Manila not as an exotic station on their journey, but as a refuge carved out of courage. The story unfolds almost quietly, hidden beneath larger headlines. For while Quezon offers this harbour, storms gather beyond the horizon. Japan's expansion grows bolder, its navy prowling the seas that wash the archipelago. In Europe, war looms closer with every passing season, and in Quezon's body, illness spreads more insistently, a private war no less relentless. Yet through all these encroaching shadows, this act of compassion glows steady, like a lamp that refuses to be extinguished. History often remembers leaders for victories, treaties, and declarations, but sometimes the truest legacy lies in decisions taken in silence, in courage exercised not on battlefields but in conference rooms, in the quiet signing of papers that mean survival for the desperate. For Quezon, the open door policy for Jewish refugees becomes such a legacy, a choice that speaks not only of political skill but of moral clarity. And so the Philippines, small among nations, becomes vast in spirit, a people still awaiting their own full independence extend freedom to others. A leader marked by illness and burden stretches the boundaries of what his office permits. In the quiet harbour of Manila, history writes an alternate story that in an age of walls, one door did open, and as ships anchor in Manila Bay, carrying lives spared from the gathering storm, we sense that the Philippines has offered not only refuge but a lesson, that even a small nation can hold a vast heart. Soon, however, the storm itself will arrive at the archipelago's shores, and Quezon's dream must face the trial of war. The Pacific is no longer a gentle expanse of blue, it heaves, restless, as though the waters themselves sense the approach of something vast and merciless. On the horizon of history, steel ships move like shadows, and above them, the air hums with the low growl of machines born for war. For the Philippines, a nation still learning to speak with its own voice, the storm arrives suddenly, tearing open the fragile promise of peace. It is December 1941 when the war that has long scorched Europe finally reaches the Pacific. News of Pearl Harbor spreads like lightning across the islands. A blow that signals not just the beginning of battles, but the unraveling of everything Manuel Quezon has tried to build. The Commonwealth of the Philippines, a young government not yet a decade old, stands at the edge of collapse. Quezon feels the weight of it at once. He has lived with shadows all his life. First Spanish rule, then American oversight, and he knows the language of power when it shifts. The Japanese advance is not just a clash of armies, it is a force that threatens to break the tender growth of a nation's independence. His heartache is with a particular sorrow. Manila, the city he opened as a harbour to refugees, now lies in the path of destruction. At first, there is defiance. General Douglas MacArthur, commanding US and Filipino forces, assures Quezon that the islands can be held. Quezon himself, though wary and ill, insists on standing firm. He walks through Malacañang Palace with a gaze sharpened by determination, his breath heavy with the tuberculosis that gnaws at his body, yet his voice still resonant. "We will fight," he tells his people. "We will endure." But endurance soon proves a cruel test. The Japanese sweep southward with terrifying speed, their armies advancing through Luzon, their planes darkening the skies over Manila. Bombs fall upon the city like thunderclaps, shattering homes, scattering families. The quiet harbour that once welcomed strangers fleeing persecution now becomes a place where its own children search desperately for shelter. Quezon sees the city he loves begin to crumble. He knows its avenues, its plazas, its churches, each stone holding the memory of centuries. Now fire consumes them. The streets echo with cries, with hurried footsteps, with the metallic rhythm of soldiers' boots. Manila, once alive with laughter and song, becomes a wounded city, its spirit torn open. In the face of this devastation, Quezon is faced with an agonizing choice. To remain in Manila is to risk capture, humiliation, perhaps death. To leave is to abandon his people to the weight of foreign boots. Yet he is more than a man now. He is the embodiment of a fragile republic. His survival, however painful, is tied to the hope that one day the Philippines might stand free. Reluctantly, with sorrow carved deep into his face, Quezon agrees to flee. He does not travel alone. His family, his cabinet, and the fragile government in exile move with him, like a small flotilla of memory struggling against the tide. They leave Manila behind as if stepping out of a burning home, unable to look back for too long for fear their hearts will break. The journey is perilous. From Corregidor, the rocky island fortress at the mouth of Manila Bay, Quezon watches as the Japanese close in. The guns of batter and thunder in the distance, brave Filipino and American soldiers holding the line with dwindling supplies, their bodies and spirits pushed beyond exhaustion. Quezon longs to be among them, to share in their fight, but his advisors remind him of his greater duty. A leader must sometimes live to fight another day, even when his heart demands otherwise. Corregidor becomes both sanctuary and prison. Deep within its tunnels, Quezon conducts the business of a government whose land is slipping from its grasp. The air is thick with dust, the walls trembling under bombardment. His illness worsens. Every cough a reminder that his body is as besieged as his nation. And yet, amid the suffocating darkness, he still speaks of the future. He tells his staff that the Philippines will rise again. that their exile is not surrender but survival. From Corregidor, Quezon and his party embark on a dangerous escape. Across waters patrolled by Japanese ships, they move secretly, quietly, the sea itself seeming to conceal them in its folds. To Mindanao they go, and from there onward to Australia. The voyage is not triumph but retreat, a bitter passage across seas that no longer feel like home. Every wave seems to whisper of Manila, of Baler, and of the countless Filipinos left behind in the storm. In Australia, Quezon meets once more with MacArthur, a man whose promise to return will soon become legend. The two leaders stand as symbols of resistance, though each bears the heavy guilt of departure. For Quezon, the sorrow is personal. He thinks of the faces of those he cannot protect, of the refugees who once found safety in his land, now vulnerable once more. Compassion, once his greatest weapon, now feels powerless against the machinery of war. And yet, even in exile, Quezon refuses despair. He carries within him the conviction that the Filipino spirit cannot be extinguished. He speaks softly to those around him, reminding them that a storm, however violent, always passes. Nations, like men, endure by holding fast to memory and hope. He writes letters, sends messages, lends his voice to the cause of resistance. A voice weakened by illness, but strengthened by love for his people. The storm across the sea is not only physical but emotional. It tears at Quezon's heart, demanding that he reconcile with the limits of leadership. He cannot shield every life, cannot save every home. What he can do is bear witness to the suffering of his people, to the bravery of those who fight, to the sorrow of those who grieve. In exile, he becomes both president and mourner, guardian of a nation's spirit while far from its soil. As 1942 unfolds, the Philippines falls under Japanese occupation. The news reaches Quezon like a blade. Manila, declared an open city to spare it destruction, has been taken. Bataan endures, Corregidor fights, but the tide is unrelenting. From afar, Quezon grieves, his soul tethered to a land he cannot touch. And yet, in that grief, he holds to a vision that one day the storm will recede and the sun will rise again over a free Philippines. The storms across the sea are vast, but Quezon's resolve remains a quiet flame. Even as his health falters, he carries the weight of a people scattered, suffering, yet unbroken. His exile is not defeat. It is a promise suspended in time, waiting for the moment when return will be possible. And so, Quezon sails further into exile, carrying with him both the sorrow of Manila's fall and the fragile hope of its rebirth. Exile is not only a place, it is a weight carried in the heart. For Manuel Quezon, exile begins not with the closing of a door, but with the leaving behind of Manila, a city wounded, a people scattered. Across the Pacific, across continents, he carries with him not only his family and his ministers, but the heavy silence of a homeland falling under foreign boots. By 1942, Washington becomes his station, though never his home. The snow and stone of the American capital stand in sharp contrast to the warmth of Baler's tamarind trees or the bustling streets of Manila. Yet, within these unfamiliar walls, Quezon must fashion a government out of memory, a republic carried not on land, but in voices, letters, and promises. The president of the Philippines now leaves as a president in exile. His body betrays him even as his spirit remains unbroken. Tuberculosis has long gnawed at his lungs, each breath a labor, each cough a reminder of fragility. Yet when he steps before an audience or sits before a microphone, his voice gathers strength. for in that voice resides more than one man. It carries the timbre of millions, those left behind in the islands now under occupation. When Quezon speaks, he is not merely a patient in decline, but the echo of a nation refusing silence. In Washington, he becomes both diplomat and witness. His days are filled with meetings, papers, consultations with American officials. He pleads for recognition of his people's suffering, for support in their resistance, for promises of independence to be honored not in theory, but in blood and sacrifice. In the shadowed rooms of power, Quezon's presence is both a reminder and a rebuke. The Philippines, once promised liberty, now bleeds for freedoms delayed. Yet exile is not only duty, it is also longing. In the quiet hours when official business fades, Quezon remembers. He recalls the laughter of children in Manila's plazas, the scent of sea air drifting into Malacañang's windows, the faces of farmers and teachers and soldiers whose lives now unfold under occupation. He remembers, too, the refugees, those Jewish families he once welcomed, who may now have found safety far away, even as his own people endure peril. Memory becomes both balm and torment, soothing him with love yet cutting him with distance. Still, Quezon does not allow grief to smother his resolve. He speaks before American audiences with words sharpened by both pain and hope. In his speeches, he paints pictures of Filipinos resisting bravely, of villages standing defiant, of a nation too proud to bow. He frames their struggle not as a distant skirmish, but as part of the greater war for humanity's soul. Our fight, he insists, is not only for ourselves. It is for the principle that no people should live under chains. His words ripple outward, reminding listeners that the Pacific Islands are not forgotten outposts but living battlegrounds of freedom. Franklin Delano Roosevelt listens. The American president, himself carrying the weight of a global conflict, finds in Quezon a mirror of determination. The two men share conversations not just of war but of vision. What might the world look like after the guns fall silent? Quezon speaks not only of a free Philippines, but of a world where smaller nations are not pawns, where compassion flows across borders as naturally as rivers. His thoughts drift toward the United Nations yet to be born, toward an order where the powerless might finally find a seat at the table. But even as Quezon dreams, his body falters. Washington's damp winters do not favor his health. He spends stretches of time in hospitals, the white walls stark against his brown skin, his breath thin, his frame diminished. Visitors sometimes find him in bed, weakened. Yet when they speak of the Philippines, his eyes brighten, his voice steadies. "I may not return," he confides to some, "but the nation will. That is what matters." Among his companions in exile, there is both admiration and sorrow. They watch their president fight not only against history's tides but against his own mortality. He becomes for them both leader and symbol, frail in body, fierce in will. Ministers labor beside him, drafting policies for a land they cannot touch, writing letters to officials who weigh their words against the broader scale of war. Each document, each signature, feels like a thread tying the exiled government to the soil of the homeland. Quezon's exile is also marked by deep personal reflection. He writes of his regrets, of choices made and unmade. Did he trust too much in American promises? Could he have defended Manila more fiercely? Such questions circle in his mind. Yet he does not dwell in bitterness. Instead, he frames his life as part of a longer arc, one that began beneath the tamarind trees of Baler and now stretches across oceans. His story, he knows, will not end with him. It will continue in the voices of those who inherit the nation. The people of the Philippines, meanwhile, endure under Japanese rule. News of hardships filters through, stories of hunger, of executions, of resistance fighters in the hills. Each report cuts into Quezon's heart like a blade, but also strengthens his resolve. If his people can endure such suffering with dignity, then he must endure his exile with purpose. He becomes their voice abroad, ensuring that the world knows their courage and their pain. Even in his frailty, Quezon does not lose his humor, his charm. To visitors, he often speaks with wit, lightening the weight of solemn discussions. He remembers names, stories, little details, reminders that leadership is not only about speeches, but about presence. Yet behind the smiles, his eyes often drift toward the distance, as though gazing across invisible seas toward a home he may never touch again. As 1943 turns to 1944, Quezon's strength wanes further. He moves to Saranac Lake in New York, where the cool mountain air offers some relief to his lungs. There, amid forests and quiet waters, he spends his last months. Even as his body weakens, he continues to dictate letters, to receive visitors, to speak of a future-free Philippines. His exile, though heavy, remains active, a mission carried until the very end. To those around him, it is clear that Quezon's days are numbered. Yet in his presence, there is no sense of defeat. He speaks often of legacy, of the language he gave his people, of the harbor he opened to strangers, of the independence that waits just beyond the horizon. He knows he will not see it with his own eyes, but he believes it will come, and that belief is enough. Exile, then, becomes Quezon's final chapter of leadership, not as a commander of armies or as a resident of palaces, but as a voice carried across oceans, a symbol of endurance. In Washington, in New York, in every speech and every letter, he reminds the world that the Philippines still lives, still fights, still dreams. His vision stretches beyond the war, beyond his life, into a future where compassion and freedom bind humanity together. And so, in the quiet halls of exile, Quezon's breath grows thin, but his vision grows vast. A vision that will carry him into his final hours, where triumph and sorrow meet, and where the last breath of a statesman becomes a nation's enduring echo. Death often arrives not with thunder, but with a slow dimming of the light. For Manuel L. Quezon, the final chapter of life is written in a quiet village far from the islands of his birth. In the summer of 1944, the war rages across the Pacific. Battles thunder in the jungles of New Guinea, fleets clash in vast oceans, and the promise of liberation edges closer. Yet Quezon, who has carried his nation's hopes through exile, lies far from the noise of war, his own body becoming a battlefield against time. He spends his last months in Saranac Lake, a small town in the Adirondack Mountains of New York. Here, the air is crisp, clean, and cool, a climate thought to soothe weakened lungs. For a man born in the humid winds of Baler and seasoned by Manila's tropical heat, the mountain air is foreign, yet it brings him a fragile measure of relief. The sanatorium's halls are hushed, its windows opening onto forests and lakes that shimmer with reflections of light. Yet, within those walls, a president breathes heavily, each inhalation an effort, each exhalation a fading flame. His illness, tuberculosis, has been his shadow for years. He has lived with its cough, its weariness, its constant reminder that strength is not endless. And yet, Quezon has never allowed frailty to silence him. Even in his final weeks, he dictates letters, receives visitors, and speaks of his beloved Philippines. Lying in bed, thin and pale, his voice carries the same cadence it once held in the Assembly, in Malacanang, in Washington. Every word now feels like a last will, a gift pressed into the air for others to carry forward. For Quezon, death is not only personal, it is entwined with history. He knows the war is shifting. American forces, led by his old comrade Douglas MacArthur, are preparing their return to the Philippines. The promise he longed to keep, that his people would not be forgotten, is on the verge of fulfillment. Yet fate is cruel. Quezon will not live to see the Japanese driven out, nor the Philippine flag raised once more in a free Manila. Liberation is close enough to touch, yet just beyond his reach. Those who surround him in his last days see both sorrow and serenity in his eyes. He speaks of unfinished tasks, of the Constitution he helped draft, of the Commonwealth whose foundation he laid. But he also speaks of peace, of his family, of the language he gave his people, the national tongue that now binds Filipinos across islands and seas. In his frailty, he sees clearly that a man's true legacy is not in monuments or palaces, but in words that endure and in lives touched by compassion. He recalls, in quiet moments, the Jewish refugees he once welcomed. Hundreds of families who, when the world closed its doors, found shelter in the Philippines. Their survival is a quiet triumph he carries with him into death. Proof that even in turbulent times, kindness can carve harbours against the storm. If I have done one good thing, he whispers, perhaps it is that. His voice, fragile as a thread, carries a truth stronger than armies. His family remains close. Aurora, his devoted wife, tends to him with quiet strength, though sorrow pools in her eyes. His children, still young, carry both the grief of impending loss and the pride of being his legacy. Around them, aides and ministers gather, men who once walked with him in the assembly, who now stand as witnesses to his final hours. The room becomes both chamber and chapel, filled with the weight of history and the intimacy of farewell. Outside, the war goes on. Radios carry reports of Allied victories, of islands retaken, of fleets advancing. For Quezon, each bulletin is both comfort and ache. He listens intently, nods faintly, sometimes smiling, sometimes closing his eyes with tears. The Philippines is suffering, but it is not forgotten. The storm is breaking. He believes, with unshakable certainty, that his people will rise again. On August 1, 1944, the end comes. It is not sudden but gradual, like a candle burning low. His breaths grow shallower, pauses stretching between them. The room is still, as though time itself bends in reverence. At last, in the presence of his family and closest companions, Manuel L. Quezon exhales his final breath. The boy from Baler, the gentleman from Tayabas, the president of a nation in exile. His journey is complete. He is only 66 years old. News of his passing spreads quickly. Across the United States, tributes rise for the man who carried his nation's cause so tirelessly. American officials speak of his eloquence, his charm, his unyielding advocacy. But it is in the Philippines, still under occupation, that his death is felt most deeply. Though the news takes time to reach them, Filipinos grieve a leader who, even from afar, embodied their dignity and their hope. In whispered prayers, in hidden gatherings, they remember him not as an exile, but as their president. Quezon's body does not return immediately to the land he loves. The war still rages, the seas still perilous. He is first interred in Arlington National Cemetery, a foreign soil that honors his bond with America. There, among rows of soldiers, he rests temporarily. A Filipino statesman lying among allies, his journey incomplete. It will take years before his remains are brought home to Manila, where he will finally rest among his people. Yet even in death, Quezon speaks. His words live on, in the Constitution, in the speeches remembered, in the national language that continues to grow. His vision outlasts his frailty. The Philippines he dreamed of does not die with him. It breathes in classrooms, in marketplaces, in the songs and prayers of his people. His kindness, too, echoes in the families who survived because he opened Manila's doors, in the descendants who remember that in the darkest years one small nation chose to be merciful. The last breath of a statesman is not silence but echo. Quezon's echo carries across seas and decades, a reminder that leadership is not measured by how long one rules, but by how deeply one cares. His triumph is not in crowns or conquests, but in the quiet legacies of language and compassion. His sorrow is not seeing independence fulfilled, but his triumph is knowing it will come. And so, far from the tamarind trees of Baler, far from the marble halls of Malacañang, Quezon's story closes. Yet even in death, he remains present, a voice in the wind, a name in the prayers of his people, a figure in the memory of nations. The boy who once listened to the sea's rhythm in Baler now becomes part of history's rhythm, carried forward in every Filipino word spoken, in every act of kindness that recalls his harbour of mercy. And so, Quezon's life falls into silence, yet the echoes of his words and deeds drift onward. Legacies seldom end with the beating of a heart. They linger in the syllables people speak, in the letters written across paper, in the songs children sing. They linger, too, in lives spared, in futures born from mercy. So it is with Manuel L. Quezon. His life closes in exile, far from the land that shaped him. Yet his spirit continues to breathe in his people's tongue and in the grateful voices of those he rescued from the shadows of war. His story does not end, it resounds. Language to Quezon had always been more than communication. It was a vessel, carrying identity and hope. When he stood before his countrymen in the 1930s and spoke of the need for a common tongue, it was not simply a political idea, it was an act of weaving. He sought to take the many dialects of the archipelago and braid them into one fabric, one voice. A nation, he believed, cannot stand divided by words. And so the Filipino language, born of Tagalog but shaped by the archipelago's many tongues, took its first fragile steps under his watch. In classrooms, children recited in this new voice. In plazas, speeches rang out, tentative at first, then more confident. In newspapers, the words began to take form on printed pages. For some, it was a difficult adjustment. For others, it was a rebirth. What mattered most was not perfection, but unity. The Philippines, scattered by seas and shaped by centuries of colonial rule, now had a language it could claim as its own. Decades later, when Filipino schoolchildren stand to sing their anthem or recite a pledge, they do so in the tongue Quezon midwifed into being. That act, often unnoticed, often taken for granted, is itself a living memorial. It is as though every spoken word carries within it a quiet whisper. Thank you for giving us this voice. But Quezon's vision was not only for his people's tongue, it was also for his people's conscience. And this, too, left its echo. In 1939, as Europe trembled under the rising shadow of fascism, As Jews were stripped of their homes, rights, and dignity, Quezon looked from his island home across the seas and chose to act. The Philippines was small, fragile, not yet independent. Yet he opened its doors to a people the world was turning away. He called it a moral duty. He called it simply human. Together with Paul McNutt, the American High Commissioner, and with the help of Jewish leaders and Filipino allies, Quezon created the Philippine Safe Haven Plan. At Marikina, he set aside land, his own land, to build homes for refugees. In Manila, he made space for them to live and work. Passports were issued, papers arranged. The number who came was not vast, about 1,200 souls, but for each of them, it meant life where there might have been none. Those who arrived carried with them stories of persecution. Synagogues burned, businesses destroyed, families scattered. In the Philippines, they found warmth, a place where the air was heavy with the scent of mango trees and the chatter of Tagalog voices. They found not suspicion, but welcome. Children played again. Men and women worked again. They built small communities, fragile yet vibrant. Years later, their descendants would look back and call Quezon a hero, a man who gave them a chance to survive. Some would say his actions were Schindler-like, though they were born not from lists and factories, but from the generosity of a leader who knew the sting of oppression himself. The Philippines had long been a land marked by colonial shadows. Perhaps it was this history of subjugation that made its people sensitive to the plight of others. Perhaps it was simply mercy. Mercy, after all, is a form of language too, one that needs no translation. Even as Quezon battled illness, even as exile drew him far from home, the echoes of his deeds gathered strength. Words can fade, but actions, once sound, grow into living trees. When the war ended and the Philippines at last stood on the brink of independence, Quezon was not there to see it. Yet his imprint was unmistakable. His voice had declared independence before its time. His hand had signed papers that gave safe passage to refugees. His dream of language was now lodged in the heart of a nation. In the years after his death, statues would be raised, parks named in his honor, films produced to retell his story. But the truest monuments to Manuel L. Quezon are less visible. They are heard in marketplaces where vendors banter in Filipino, in classrooms where children learn their history in their own tongue. They are seen in family photos of Jewish descendants living full lives in America, Israel, and beyond. Descendants who know that a leader from across the sea once opened a door for their grandparents. This is the weight of deeds, that they ripple outward far beyond the moment of choice. This is the echo of words, that they take root and grow into forests long after the speaker has fallen silent. It is easy, when remembering leaders, to think only of power, the speeches, the offices, the grand gestures. But Quezon's legacy whispers something gentler. That leadership is also made of compassion, of decisions that may seem small in their moment, yet alter the course of countless lives. He did not live to see the Philippines rise from the ashes of war. He did not live to see independence formally declared in 1946, but he planted the seeds. And perhaps in the end, planting is enough. History often bends toward those who leave monuments of stone. Yet Quezon left something more enduring, monuments of breath and voice, of kindness and memory. The Filipino language continues to evolve, continues to carry its people's stories, their prayers, their laughter. The Jewish families he sheltered continue to live, to love, to remember. Between the two runs a single thread, a belief that humanity, expressed in word and in deed, is stronger than any empire or storm. As the candle of his life burned out in exile, Quezon's light did not vanish. It spread, it diffused into voices and into futures, and it remains with us, a quiet proof that words can unite and mercy can save. And so Quezon's story ends not in silence, but in echoes. His words carried by a people who found their voice, his deeds remembered by lives he spared. The past closes its chapter, yet leaves us with a lingering question. When history calls upon us, will our own words and deeds carry the same weight? And so, the story of Manuel L. settles into the quiet of memory. A boy who once sat beneath the tamarind trees of Baler, who grew to give his people a language and to open his small nation as a harbour for strangers adrift in the storm of history. His life reminds us that true leadership is not counted only in laws or titles, but in the courage to speak for the voiceless and the compassion to see humanity as one. Even now, across the distance of years, his kindness ripples outward, like a lantern set upon dark waters, its glow still reaching unseen shores. Thank you for sharing this quiet space with me tonight. In listening, you have become part of the echo, part of the gentle thread that carries these stories from one heart to another, across time itself. It is a quiet gift we share, and I am grateful for your presence here. Now, let the story rest, the way a book closes softly on a nightstand. Let your thoughts grow lighter, like leaves drifting on a still river. May sleep find you easily, and may your dreams carry you through calm harbours of peace and wonder. This has been the Sleeping Hourglass, a place where the past tucks you in, and where the hush of history becomes a lullaby for the present. If tonight's story has brought you comfort, know that you are always welcome to return, whenever you need a gentle hand to guide you through the corridors of time. And now, as the candle burns low and silence folds itself around you, rest well, dear listener. Beneath the soft hush of history's lullaby,